With that, thank you, Assistant Registrar. My name is Mark McCarley. I am this year's chair of the Glendale Civil Service Commission. And on behalf of myself and my fellow commissioners, we welcome you all for your both active participation here today at our council chambers, and as well those of you who are watching us on GT6. And with that, we will begin. And Deputy Registrar.
Commissioner Karian?
Here.
Commissioner Gazarian?
Here.
Commissioner Devine?
Here.
Chair McCarley?
Here.
For the record, Commissioner Manukian is absent.
And with that, if we could review the minutes of our previous meeting in January. Those minutes were provided to all commissioners, dated January the 9th. And after review, I entertain a motion for approval.
Move to approve.
Second. I have a motion for approval and a second, Deputy Registrar, and we'll call for the vote.
Commissioner Karian?
Yes.
Commissioner Gazarian?
Yes.
Commissioner Devine?
Yes.
Chair McCarley?
Yes. And moving along.
Mr. Chair?
Yes. Mr.
Pardon
Registrar.
my interruption, but I wanted to notify the Commission that we're recommending that item number 6 be pulled from this agenda, the class specification for approval involving the Purdue Fire Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Doyle. Do I hear any comment or objection? Hearing none, that item is removed from our agenda. I'm looking across those who are in active participation here. I'm not sure if anybody has come to address the subject of class specification for approval of the Verdugo Fire Manager. And seeing no one stepping up and vacating the chambers, we'll move on to oral communications. This is an opportunity for those of you who have signed our speaker cards to address this commission on subjects important to you, either as members of our community or as employees or leaders of our city. There are certain rules, and these rules must be strictly complied with, and that is the length of your presentation cannot exceed 5 minutes. And of course, as we extend respect to each of the speakers, we'd ask for reciprocal respect in exchange. This is always a discourse and exchange of ideas between yourself and this commission in order to positively influence the workplace environment for all those who call Glendale home and their employer. And so I have 3 cards in no order of importance. I will first call Walter Alvarez. Mr. Alvarez, please.
Good evening, Chair McCarley, members of the Commission, city staff. For the record, my name is Walter Alvarez. I'm proud to say that I am a 19-and-a-half-year employee of the city of Glendale. It gives me great pleasure to be here before you. Big fan of the reality TV you guys provide. I understand I'm limited.
I appreciate the humor. I was going to say something about that at the commencement of my remarks, but I figured they'd suspend me if I did, so thank you for that.
I understand I'm limited to 5 minutes, so I'll proceed with my request.
Thank you.
I'm here before you to respectfully make 2 requests. My first request is for a report seeking clear interpretation and application of Rule 8, Promotion, Section 1, Promotion based on examination. My second request is more of a recommendation or proposal for consideration for an amendment of a specific civil service rule. As I make my request, please keep in mind the following statement written in the introduction of the civil service rules, and I quote, "The Charter of the City of Glendale creates a civil service system and commission. The Civil Service Commission, through the Human Resource Department, establishes and enforces rules for the classified service which shall have the force and effect of law. These rules ensure a merit system whereby all employees in the classified service are appointed and promoted by a basis of merit." My layman's understanding of this introductory statement is that written rules and regulations contained in the Civil Service Rules Manual are not simply written guidelines, that one doesn't have the discretion to disregard or follow them as they wish, if they wish. I will proceed with my first request, seeking interpretation and application of Rule 8, Promotion, Section 1. And I quote, "Unless the Commission finds that it would not be consistent with the best interests of the city, a vacancy in any position in the classified service except a position in the lowest grade in any class except one for which competition has been suspended, as provided in Article 24 of the Charter, shall be filled by promotion based on competitive examination and I quote, and I emphasize, and available records of efficiency, character, conduct, and seniority. Promotional eligibility lists shall be created and promotional appointments made from these lists." Again, my layman's interpretation of this rule is that when a hiring department is attempting to fill a position by promotional process, they will conduct a promotional competitive examination and then proceed with evaluating and comparing the top 3 ranked candidates' available records of efficiency, character, conduct, seniority to select and promote a candidate based on merit. My interpretation and understanding that the most appropriate records to reference and use to measure these performance traits would be through review of the top 3 candidates' personnel records and performance evaluations. I now move forward to my second request. This request is to respectfully recommend and propose consideration of an additional amendment to Civil Service Rule and Regulations. At the last Commission meeting dated January 9th, an amendment was proposed and approved the following rule. Rule 4, Section 10, oral examinations. Additional language was proposed and added stating to avoid the appearance of bias in the oral board process. In light of this approved amendment, I respectfully propose additional amendment to the same rule, Section 10, subsection C. I propose deletion of language, specifically the following. In-house oral board examination panelist is, if an in-house oral board examination panelist is selected, he or she should not be involved in the final decision following certification of top 3 ranks. Additionally, deletion of the phrase "whenever possible." With the removal of this language, the amended rule will be concrete and read, "In-house board panelists will not be utilized for promotional examinations unless a promotability panel or internal panel is used." Bear with me. Using any in-house panelist for any reason under any pretext in promotional examinations has the appearance of bias. For example, the in-house panelist may have family members in the hiring department, may have close friends in the hiring department, may have frequently utilized services or programs of the hiring department, 10 seconds, may not work in the field or be familiar with the overall background relating to the subject matter of the exam, or the use of in-house panelists may be perceived as an exercise of quid pro quo selection process between departments engaging in possible pre-selection of candidate and bias.
Sir, appreciate it. Can you sum it up?
I'll wrap it
Your
up.
overtime.
Now allowing HR the flexibility to use in-house panelists will not limit their hands or tie their hands to secure outside panelists. I'm confident that HR will develop and implement a suitable process to assure candidates from outside are always secured. That concludes my presentation, and I appreciate your time and attention to my recommendations and considerations.
We extend the same note of appreciation to you. Just a quick comment from the chair is that we did go through what we considered a very intensive review of the rules and regulations of this commission. In some respects, I would have suggested that this presentation come last year, because at that particular point in time, we were indeed involved in looking at these rules and regulations with respect to affording our employees the maximum rights under both state law and the city charter. What we will do, there'll be conversation amongst us at the conclusion of this meeting when we have discourse among the five of us. I would recommend that you put that in writing. Some of this has been recorded. It has great value. Submit a summary of your presentation to the registrar. That's Mr. Doyle, HRC chief, and I can assure you that we will take a look at them. There were very interesting points that you brought up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, one further question.
Yes.
Always a benefit from a board recommendation to work closely. I assume you're an employee, a 19-year successful employee of the city. This is a suggestion, nothing more than that, that you coordinate with your representative unit, because that's always valuable. The representative unit, the whole structure of a representative unit is that it advances the voices of its many members. So thank you.
I appreciate the recommendation. Thank you. Well taken. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Alvarez. Ignacio Saavedra.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and the members of the...
Yes,
I apologize. I don't mean to
Commissioner
cut you
Abkarian.
off. This might be a discussion on an item that's already itemized, and that might be it, but if it is, then you need to...
That is a fair statement. I will look to the deputy registrar and the registrar. We do have reference to the issue that you brought forth. Minimum qualification interpretation rule.
No, are you here to speak on?
number 11?
On item 11?
No, I'm just...
All right, you
Yeah, but-
have every right to make an oral presentation. That's afforded you by the charter, so we look forward to your comments. The only reason that our previous chair, our illustrious chair, came forth is to remind me that we have to make this thing move forward and come to some sort of positive outcome. So go ahead, Mr. Rivera.
Okay,
Please.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Chair and the members of the commission and city staff. My name is Ignacio Saavedra. I'm a 20-year veteran of the city of Glendale under the Integrated Waste Management section in Public Works. I am before you today to express my gratitude for the opportunity you allowed me at the last civil service meeting to present a number of unresolved issues I have been experiencing and attempting to resolve with our human resources, my own department, and city manager's office. Many topics that were brought up were civil rights violations, bylaw violations from our bargaining unit, lack of equipment, short-staffed, and department audit, all of which have been addressed by HR and upper management. After my presentation, I felt the entire commission was very welcoming and receptive. I was patiently heard and was provided good guidance and support. The commission educated me and gave me the tools needed to start a process to resolve these issues that have been addressed but not resolved. After the meeting, I met with Mr. Dole and his staff to discuss some issues. One issue in particular was my workers' comp, in which I asked Mr. Dole for clarity in the administrative policy regarding light-duty accommodations. This matter was at a standstill for a long period of time, but now it's moving forward with additional much-needed approved and assessment and evaluations. I feel that it was your advice and guidance given at the last meeting that has initiated something that got the ball rolling, and for that, I express my sincere gratitude, and I cannot thank this Civil Service Commission enough. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Quite unusual for that sort of note of beneficial activity on the part of this commission. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Very good. And our final card, James Griggs, please.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, city staff. My name is James Griggs. I am a station electrician at Grayson Power Plant, and I'm also a shop steward with the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Local 18. So I'm here because we have some concerns with the job bulletin, some language change, and we weren't able to resolve that issue with Mr. Nasurian. So I would like to present it to you.
I'm sorry, Mr. Who?
Mr. Nassarian.
Excuse me?
Nassarian.
Oh,
Necessian, I'm sorry.
Nersessian,
Yeah,
okay.
That's helpful, thank you.
Okay. Sorry I butchered your name, Steve.
Sorry.
The power plant maintenance.
May I ask you one thing?
Yes, sir.
Not to interrupt you in any way. When you use the word "we," is that "we" for you alone, or are there other members that you are, in a sense, speaking for tonight?
I am speaking for the power plant maintenance section, in particular the power plant mechanics.
Thank you.
Sure. So the concern is involved in the power plant maintenance supervisor job bulletin. So we assert that modifying the central functions of the job bulletin for the power plant maintenance supervisor gives an advantage and preferential treatment to one individual in the power plant, the instrument and control supervisor. This was accomplished by adding this statement, and I quote, "works closely with and may directly supervise the instrument and control section." This statement could not only harm the power plant mechanics' career advancement, but also has the potential to disenfranchise another classification of promotion opportunity, the power plant technicians. There is also a distinction between a lead worker and a supervisor. We don't know if this statement was added as a way to circumvent the 5-year minimum requirement as a lead worker. Further, this statement would allow a civil servant to hold multiple positions. We believe this to be a violation of Civil Service Rule 2, classifications. Prior to a list being established and hiring, we would request an investigation into this matter by you. Finally, we would like to request that you take a look at issues that we have involved in the following classifications in the power plant. Number 1, power plant maintenance supervisor. Under minimum requirements for experience, why is 5 years in a responsible operating position in a steam, electric, and gas turbine generating plant a requirement for a maintenance position? Number 2, power plant superintendent. Under minimum requirements for experience, why 6 years experience on the operations staff of a steam and gas turbine electric generating plant? This is exclusive. This provides promotional path for the top job to only one classification series. We believe that to be unfair. Why is there no mid-management position for the station electrician series in the power plant? We also believe that to be unfair. And just to reference the Administrative Policy Manual under position classifications, it states that division heads and the supervisors who work for them have a responsibility in the maintenance of the classification plan to see to it that their employees work with its proper classifications. So that is the concern that I bring before you, and thank you for your time.
Yeah, I appreciate it. In reference to Rule 2, I think it's worthwhile if I read it.
Sure.
Since you did refer to it. A classification plan shall be adopted by the commission after public notice and hearing by an order entered in its minutes classifying all positions in the classified service according to the plan provided in Section 1 of this rule. And such plan shall be kept on file in the Human Resources Department. So without reference, because we do not have that material, that's the challenge associated with oral communications, is we don't really have the reference material, is I would assume that within the last 6 months, this commission did in fact approve a modified or changed classification plan for the facility in which you work. Is that Mr. Doyle?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, I'm not aware that any change has been made to the specification classification for this position or the series. I've not been I've not been briefed on this matter that Mr. Griggs has brought before us. Looking on our report, it indicates that we have posted a bulletin for power plant maintenance supervisor, which had looks like a 2-week filing period. Is that the one you're referring to, Mr. Griggs?
Yes, it is, Mr. Doyle. And the change that I'm referring to was under the essential functions of the job. And I've
What's the date on that? We're asking you to do some of that homework, and that's, if you want to follow through on this, my recommendation as a chair would be that you encapsulate this, summarize it, put it into some sort of documentation so we have some way of taking a look at this. And that's one of the reasons I turned to our registrar, because his historical memory is better than my own as to whether within the last 6 months or a year we in fact made changes to the classification. I don't know if we have. Perhaps you know this. And I should indicate that if in fact, is this individual to you, meaning that you cannot apply, that you would be disqualified for a promotional opportunity?
No, it is for
others.
For others in our membership. Right. And there were changes made to the classification, specifically on the essential jobs function. And I have the original bulletin, the bulletin that's posted on the website, and that
Perfect.
does not include that.
Could you kindly do something for us?
Absolutely.
One of my distinguished colleagues has several questions for you, Mr. Devine, but I will conclude by asking you to put that in writing, especially the date in which you believe that this commission made modifications that, if I understand you correctly, excluded a certain number of people from qualifying for this promotional opportunity.
No, actually, it does. The latter part of your statement is correct, but the first part, the commission, this didn't come before the commission for approval.
This is some previous, so you're working backwards.
No. This particular change, right, because it doesn't involve the minimum requirements, okay. This change was made independently of the commission.
All right,
and
that's
I was unaware of that. I couldn't provide documentation to
That's
the commission,
good.
so
with
I
that,
can do that. I can summarize it in an email
perfect.
to you.
And we appreciate bringing it. I believe that Commissioner Devine has some questions because this is of significance.
Yeah, I have a suggestion rather
Thank you.
than
Oh, sure.
dealing with this comment and the comments made by Mr. Alvarez earlier. I think that this commission should probably follow the lead of City Council when during oral communications questions like this or concerns like this come up. Generally what the council does is have them submit that to staff. Staff then prepares a report for council explaining the council both sides, the appellant side and the staff side, and that comes to the commission, so we have the full package.
Absolutely.
So rather than getting into a discussion with each of the oral communicators, I suggest that you ask them to submit it in writing, which you've done, to the staff, and have staff prepare a report briefing us on what the concerns are.
Absolutely. And that is the only way that we can really address some of the issues. We don't have background paperwork. So if you could push, especially in your capacity as shop steward of IBEW. So thank you, sir.
Sure, I can do that.
Oh, Mr. Gazarian. Commissioner Gazarian.
Thank you. Mr. Gritz, I heard you say we request an investigation by you, and this is a statement. I'm not posing the question to you. I think we've gone down this road before, and there's been disappointment on the part of a few that we have not conducted an investigation. I just want to clarify with Commission Counsel, we do not have independent investigative powers. That's my understanding. Am I mistaken?
No, you're correct that there's no independent investigative powers, but as was proposed, it's a matter that could be directed to the HR director, who can then review the matter and address the validity of the claim or the information that supports the claim. The more appropriate time to bring up these issues, as you would imagine, is if when the matter's before the commission, but as he's indicated, this didn't come before the commission. So that would be the more appropriate time for you to consider it.
Okay.
Commissioner Abkarian.
Sorry about that. I just want to understand, you just made a statement that I don't think was the understanding that I had of our investigative power. My understanding is that we don't have investigative power when it comes to specific individuals or their complaints on that specific individuals, because those items could come in front of us on an appeal, and if we do an investigation and all of a sudden we find something, then we actually prevent one side or the other from their actual right of having fair hearing and a due process in front of us. However, our charter allows us to investigate general matters having to do with, specifically with, civil service processes that are not specific to any individual, but it's specific to investigating to ensure that the process itself is fair. So that investigation, we still have power over that investigation, those investigations.
The distinction, if I can, is the difference between one individual commissioner investigating an item versus your HR director. So if it's a matter that falls within your purview and there's an inquiry as to whether or not a complaint that came in has merit, that's something that the HR director gathers information typically and then presents it to the commission. But beyond that, no, an individual commissioner does not then do investigations.
There is an it says investigations in the charter.
Yes.
So we have the right. One thing we don't have the right is to investigate individual complaints, because that individual could come in front of us on an appeal, and that appeal could be heard by us, and by not allowing the city or the other side to do it. And that I understood. That I didn't have a problem. Well, I have a problem with it, but I said that I will adhere to it even though I don't agree with it. However, the investigation power to ensure a fair process in the civil service process, for example, looking at the entire process to ensure that the process going through A through B is fair. Again, for example, making sure that there are oral panels in
I'm not
all.
disagreeing with you.
No. I know it. I'm just trying to just make sure the record clear, because that the oral panels are fair in the process that they go through, regardless of who the individual is. So that I want to make sure that I understand that we have the right to do that.
I think this, speaking as the chair, I think this conversation is very valuable. You sort of initiated a topic that I wanted to address in my first evening as chair, and that is the authorities that we maintain as a commission. And of course, for reference, not only for you, Mr. Griggs, but for others out there, as authorized by the city charter, Article 24, we indeed, as Mr. Abkarian has indicated, have substantial powers. We can look at classifications of positions, competitive examinations, eligible lists, grounds for rejection of candidates or eligibles, as long as we look at the process. And so I believe what you are addressing is valuable. I incorporate the remarks of Commissioner Devine because we don't have the tools tonight to do that. And because you have raised your hand and you are serving as a shop steward, which is a position of significant responsibility and with which we coordinate as part of the collective bargaining agreement, please kindly submit that document with those reference materials. This is worthwhile taking a look at.
Okay, I will do that, Mr. Chairman, and I believe that you had the authority to perform investigations, hence my request.
And that is a topic I would say to you at this particular point that we will scrutinize it. That's why we have the valuable contributions of the city attorney. But by the same token, we listen to what you say with great attention and perhaps some support, significant support for what you say. So please send the materials. Whether we get resolution for what you have, these individual issues, maybe not. But this is, the way I'm looking at it is far broader, with all due respect to the great employees that you supervise now and you represent, but this is far broader across the entirety of our workforce in the city of Glendale. So you brought forth a very interesting issue. Thank you.
I'm sorry, Chair, but I did not get an answer. In fact, it brought about additional questions, questions that caused me concern, and that is, first and foremost, I heard the gentleman talk about this was not something that came before Civil Service Commission because it was not something that was commensurate with minimum standards. So I took that to mean that it is something that is below minimum standards, which may not have civil service overview. Now, maybe I'm mistaken, but assuming it does have civil service overview and embracing the powers that are vested in this commission in the charter, investigative powers, I am concerned that anytime a body goes into an investigative mode, this body risks to have that very matter which it is investigating come before it, and then this body is then entrusted with and placed in a position of neutral arbiter of that which it itself investigated. So if investigative powers mean that we assign it to our chief examiner, registrar, or city staff to conduct the investigation, I'm fine. But if it means that the public out there or the civil service employees of our city are now going to be left with the impression that each and every one of us, or together, we have a duty and an obligation and a power to investigate, and therefore I'm going to be fielding emails about you're not investigating, or oral communications that you guys did not investigate, meaning us individually or collectively as 4 or 5 of us, as opposed to city staff. I'm not sure that that's what the drafters of the charter had in mind.
All right, with Mr. Abkarian, and I think I'll conclude this conversation.
What I want to do is not discuss this at this point, because this is not an agendized item, and I think we might be crossing into some questionable areas. I think we should, again, one more time, put this on the agenda next time.
Okay.
And just then we have in-depth discussion on this particular issue, because I want once and for all, no.
I'll defer to the chair.
With that, and the chair, having received a recommendation, a request from 2 senior members of this commission that this matter, the subject of what you're talking about, not the specific instances, but the subject across the entirety of the workforce here in the city of Glendale, be brought forth an agendized item. I think we should give a month. Is that a sufficient period of time to come forth with? Because the review, I will tell you that the review will focus on this issue of the extent of our authorities to investigate, taking into consideration that provision in the charter that says that either a single member or the commission itself may investigate, make investigations concerning the enforcement and effect of this article, which is in fact the civil service rules and of the rules and efficiency of the service. So the key is the extent of investigation. See, you've opened up. Thank you. You've done a great service to the workforce of Glendale.
I didn't mean to initiate a legal symposium.
No, but the unfortunate problem about it is right now you've got 3 lawyers, 3.5 lawyers with Commissioner Devine.
So 4.5. We have the
oh my
commission
God,
counsel.
we have 4, and thank you. I really want to appreciate what you did.
You're welcome.
So to address your point as to when this would come back, I just wanted to let you know that our office would not be conducting any additional research. There was a very thorough report that was prepared, not one time, but I think 4 different times.
That's perfect.
And so we can bring back the same memo, but there would be no additional research that we would do. The law has not changed in this area, and neither has the opinion of the city attorney.
With that valuable comment from our city attorney, then we can, of course, look at materials. There is no recommendation or directive from the chair to redo good work that's already been done. But I believe we need a conversation, and this has been something, it just so happens Mr. Griggs precipitated it, but it's absolutely perfect, quite frankly, for my first night here as a chairperson. This has got to be discussed once again. Thank you. Thank you all, commissioners. All right, now we can move into something a bit more mundane.
Recruitment and examination report.
All right, and with that, we turn to our registrar.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, this is our monthly recruitment and examination workload status report. We have a bit of an uptick as far as activity this month. Looks like we have 63 total processes, and I think that's an indication of the workload, and I think largely between the second half of December and early January, we didn't schedule many examination processes, so I think we got perhaps a little backed up. But the next few months, we'll be scheduling many exams and trying to keep up with this workload. If there's any questions you have about this report, I'd be happy to try and answer them. Otherwise, this is a note and file.
Thank you, Registrar. Any questions from my esteemed members? Hearing none.
Eligible list established.
Mr. Registrar.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, this is the eligible list established since our last meeting, which was last month. The report you will see we have looks like 6 lists have been established, 4 involving the single classification of police officer recruit, and then 1 promotional involving the fire department, and then a promotional and open recruitment involving Glendale Water and Power for a water system helper. This is, again, a note and file item for your consideration. If you have questions, I'd be happy to try and answer them.
I have one question.
We do have Commissioner Kazarian.
On job number 8429, it lists 315 applicants, or applications received, and total eligible on the list is 6. My question is that 6 out of the 315 in addition to the 25, which is pre-service academy graduates, of which 5 are eligible, and in addition to the 43 bilingual Armenian police officer recruits, of which 1 is eligible, and in addition to the 11 police officer recruit bilingual Korean, of which 1 is eligible?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Guzarian, that's a separate and apart from the other 3 processes. The way we run this, we're in such a intense hiring mode for police officer recruits. We do the bilingual bulletins, we do the pre-service academies, sometimes we do lateral transfers all at the same time, but each of these rows represents a specific recruitment process. And again, all the main components of that exam are similar, but the police officer recruit is just, that's the general open process that we get, really the bulk of our candidates from.
So am I correct in going about adding these numbers of applications received, all of these separate ones combining together, that make up 394, along with the eligible ones that make up 13?
That's correct.
All right, thank you. That's all I want. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe that number 6 has been removed from our agenda, so we'll push forward to number 7.
Class specification for approval, financial application series.
Mr. Doyle.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, this is a class specification for the series, financial application series. What we're doing is encompassing 3 new classifications into an existing series where we had already in existence a financial applications manager and administrator, but we're establishing classifications below that within this job series to serve as more or less the support team for the city's enterprise resource planning group within finance. This group integrates our core business functions, including utilizing software, applications, and technology. They're largely responsible for implementing and maintaining our Tyler Munis program, both from the HR side and the payroll, and now the financials side of it, which is the current project. And employees in these classifications have to be very skilled in both finance and also information technology, thus the need for a specific series with all these various levels. With that, this is a specification. It would require commission review if you see to it. We have Mr. Elliott, who's our finance director, and Ms. Flynn, who's our assistant finance director here, as well as Amy Martin from my staff, if you have questions.
Thank you, Mr. Registrar. If you could kindly come forward. This will provide us with a valuable insight. The first question from the chair is the reason for the classification, recognizing that you have provided valuable service even in the ERP arena for a long period of time, and we are taking the financial manager position and in fact providing what appears to me to be a ratcheted step up with an analyst and an administrator. So what caused us to go from no such steps to a more distinct classification?
Good evening, Commissioner. My name is Michelle Flynn, and members of the Commission. I am the Assistant Finance Director.
Thank you.
The applications team supports, as Mr. Doyle indicated, our main application, which is our ERP citywide, HR, payroll, and now financials that we just went live in January. When we created the team several years ago, as we were implementing the software, we created the specifications for a manager as well as an administrator. As that project has continued and is now all fully live. The need to have additional staff on that team, we actually had to move one of our accountants over to that team about a year and a half ago, and he's been serving in the capacity of one of these types of positions that we are now creating. So we're trying to basically prepare to have that team fully support the software. We don't know how many more we may add, if any, but we definitely have 3 people in these roles that are basically performing the jobs that are needed for
That
us.
you have borrowed or shuffled from other parts of the finance department.
Correct.
In
Correct.
their present classifications.
Yes.
And compensations.
Yes.
Compensation schemes.
And they've been a great skill, he's been a great skill set. We've had others that are in that same, in that team. I mean, they've been instrumental in getting us to where we are on the
So if
system.
I could summarize, your department expects to grow because of the need for ERP services across the city. The finance department in support of every single department within the city. And therefore, you will grow from the present number of manager, assistant, and one sort of helper from another department or another section. And you're going to grow to 6 or 7, it's anticipated. What's your growth? Anticipated growth?
We're actually not sure yet.
But you have projected.
Right, we've just gone live on the financial piece, so it's only been a month and a half. So what the support level will be going forward is to be determined at this point.
But this is anticipatory planning.
It is. So we figured we would, at the same time, try to create a series, and it would also help encourage, if anybody did want to move into that role in finance, then there would be some sort of a training ground for them to move up into supporting that software if the need arose.
I turn to my commissioners. Commissioner Abkarian. Sure.
I just have a question. When I see, financial application specialist having 1-year requirement, financial application analyst having 2 years, senior financial application has 3 years, those are pretty specific numbers. Are those picked for, is there a reason for those, why not 5 years? Just 1, 2, and 3, just because they just sound right? Or is somebody who has 2-year experience then will be able to be the financial application analyst? I sometimes this numbers, why not 5 years for senior financial? Wouldn't that be better?
I think we tried to mimic the current classifications we have through the city that are similar, as well as other cities. We worked together with Amy on this, so she might have a little bit more.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, good evening. Amy Martin, Assistant Director of Human Resources. In answer to your question, we did look at some other classifications in other agencies. This is a very specific niche field, so there aren't very many. We actually looked at classifications in other states because there aren't very many within the local Southern California area. But in determining the level of experience, we identified, the administrator requires 7 years and the manager 5 years, so it didn't make sense to have the senior also at 5 years. We wanted to have a stair step up to the manager and administrator levels.
Are these tied to compensation bands as well, so that you have some sort of tentative view of what these individuals, when subsequently recruited, whether this year or 5 years from now, will be paid in terms of banding, not specific numbers, but
yes, they
in
will
relationship to other members of your department who have same or similar responsibilities, maybe not with a technical ERP background?
Yes, they will be tied to specific salary ranges.
Yeah, salary range. I call them bands, but range. Okay, thank you. Any further questions? With that, I call for the question.
Commissioner Abkarian?
Yes? Move to approve first.
Second?
Commissioner Abkarian?
Yes.
Commissioner Kazarian?
Yes.
Commissioner Devine?
Yes.
Chair McCarley?
Yes. Thank you. And with that, we move forward with number 8.
Job bulletin for approval, community service specialist.
Mr. Doyle, Registrar.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission. This item is a bulletin for approval for the Community Services Specialist. This is a request to post this bulletin as an open recruitment process. This is being brought to the commission because of in its previous recruitment, it was done on a promotional basis. And we received this request from the Community Services and Parks Department, really an effort to broaden the pool of potential candidates. I don't want to say that this is necessarily an entry-level position, but it is the first level within this series, which goes community service specialist, coordinator, supervisor above that. Most of the internal candidates for this position would be at a lower level, or many of them hourly, part-time. Some of those are seeking full-time work, others are not. But the request for an open recruitment, again, is to ensure that the city has a sufficient pool of qualified candidates for this position. If this item requires commission approval, if you so approve, we have Onig Bulanikian, our Director of Community Services and Parks, is here, as well as Ms. Navarro from my staff.
As I always say, I'm delighted that you're in attendance. So if the proponents can come forward, we welcome your participation. Hopefully the questions will not be too intrusive or difficult. This is, of course, a non-exempt position.
Yes,
Hourly.
Chair McCarley, members of the commission, Onig Bulanikian, Director of Community Services.
My pleasure.
Thank you for having me here and speaking on this position. The Community Service Specialist is a civil service position, non-exempt. As Mr. Doyle mentioned, it's first of the class series. We have Community Service Specialist, Coordinator, Community Service Supervisor, Senior Community Service Supervisor, Community Service Manager, and then Community Service Administrator. So this is the first level as part of the Community Service series.
And without disrupting you, I think that that's very valuable in your proponency because of something that came up. It is, and you have called it entry level, which certainly is a strong justification for going open procurement on this thing.
Yes.
Maybe I misread it. I see there's a salary band, excuse me for the use of the word, I came from a different world, and that is between, it's recommended it's indicated on the bulletin. So this is not an hourly, or is that an hourly based upon the 40 hours times an hourly rate?
This is a full-time position.
Full-time position.
Full-time position, 40 hours a week. Position will probably be on a 540 schedule, Monday through Friday. There will be some weekend work. This position will oversee the One Glendale After-School Youth Sports Program, which is the joint collaboration program with Glendale Unified, plus the Youth and Family Services Program.
And that's valuable. One other question, is there any tie-in with the Youth Alliance, and as a Youth Alliance has provided sort of temporary workers here?
Youth Alliance does provide temporary workers at our day camp, for our summer day camp program. For the One Glendale program, they don't. We have recreation leaders that operate Monday through Thursday between 2 and 5:30 on school sites, and programming at 8 different schools south of the 134.
I see. And this would this individual who eventually will be hired as a supervisor for those people, or would basically provide similar or complementary work?
Assist in the supervision and program development and implementation.
Thank you.
Move to approve.
Second.
Call the question.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation.
Commissioner Karian?
Yes.
Commissioner Gazarian?
Yes.
Commissioner Devine?
Yes.
Chair McCarley?
Yes. And with that, we move to number 9.
Job
Mr.
bulletin
Doyle,
for
it looks like you
approval.
have a question. You're inquisitive.
Just waiting for the next item.
Fire captain.
Fire captain. You always have great interest in that position. With that, Mr. Registrar.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, this item is a bulletin for approval for fire captain within the fire department. This is the individual who supervises a fire company, either an engine or a truck. The reason this is coming before you is that our rules require any safety promotional bulletins to come before the commission. And this certainly qualifies for that. This is obviously a safety position. We are handling it promotionally to provide an opportunity for all of our internal candidates. This bulletin is fully consistent with the approved class specification. In fact, it is very similar to the last bulletin. The one point of clarification is involving the selection process that we are doing written exam and then following that an interview / performance exam, a practical exam. And that exam is going to entail a tactical exercise, a supervisory exercise, and a traditional oral panel. So it's a significant day for each of these candidates. And what we're recommending on the selection process is that of the candidates taking the written portion, that we take approximately all those passing, but the top 12, approximate top 12 scores onto that practical portion of it. We'd like to take more than that, obviously, but for the purposes of our logistics and just practicality, we feel that we can get approximately 12 candidates in 2 days of testing. Very labor-intensive process. So this issue, this bulletin, has been discussed with our Firefighters Association, and I'm looking at the chief. I'm assuming those talks were fruitful, and there are no objections to these changes. So, with that, this item is for your consideration. We do have newly appointed Chief Lanzas here as well.
We would look forward to an introduction, sir, and congratulations. Since we gave Chief Fish such a hard time over the last 2 years that I've been up here.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Silvio Lanzas, Fire Chief. Thank you for the congratulations. And yeah, I think Mr. Doyle introduced the position very well. It's a very important position within the fire department. The fire captain is essentially the nucleus of the entire organization. They're the lead, frontline leader that's out there interacting with our public and making sure that our standards are met every day.
Any questions, comments from the commission? Mr. Devine, Commissioner Devine.
Yes, on the multi-stage oral interview panels or process, does that include a citizens panel?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Devine, for this one, it does not include a citizens panel. Those are typically the management level, and the next level up would be a battalion chief. I believe we would do that for that level. Certainly, deputy chief, and the same with police safety promotionals. Typically, it's at the captain level or above that we've done that. But not.
So there's a difference between the police captain and the fire captain?
Oh, yes, sir, significantly. The fire captain is within the bargaining unit, and it's just the order of rank goes firefighter, fire engineer, and fire captain. And the fire captain, as I said earlier, is the immediate supervisor over that fire company. And then above that, you have the battalion chiefs who oversee multiple fire companies, and then we have a deputy chief here in Glendale, and of course the fire chief.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments?
Yes. Mr. Doyle, is this a promotional bulletin?
Yes, sir.
It is, right?
Yes.
Move to approve. Second.
Commissioner Karian?
Yes.
Commissioner Gazarian?
Yes.
Commissioner Devine?
Yes.
Chairman McCarley?
Yes.
Welcome.
I'm not sure if we should hope to see you all the time. If we don't, that means the department's functioning perfectly. Thank you.
You don't need to come every time.
All right. We'll move on to number 10.
Adoption of resolution, report on unclassified status proposal for homeless programs coordinator position.
This is interesting. I look forward to conversation, discussion, delineation of what this is all about. It certainly is topical, Mr. Registrar.
Certainly, Mr. Chair. We're going to be having Mr. Bulanikian back to help address this matter. But yes, this is an adoption of a resolution, and I believe we need to do a public hearing for this. to designate one position of homeless programs coordinator as unclassified. And I always preface this when we bring an item like this to the commission by saying that this is something we do very infrequently, because what it means is we're taking this position outside of the civil service parameters. Typically, the positions we've done this for are trainee positions, apprenticeship type positions, these positions that take multiple years of training and development in order to ascertain someone's fitness for the duties. But one area where we have done this historically is when you have a position that involves some sort of grant funding or any type of external funding that is outside the city's control that may come to an end at some point, and we end up with the situation of not having funding for a particular position and having to address it. In this case, the Community Services and Parks Department, Mr. Bulanikian, has received approval to fill a position within the Homeless Services section, a salaried position, and we've made some efforts to fill some of our staffing in this position on an hourly basis, but we're just finding that we're not having the the quality or the interest on an hourly position. So we're seeking to do this on a salaried basis, but the only way that we could find to fund this position was to obtain funding through various grants. The staff report addresses those grants. We have Measure H, which is the LA County measure. We have this HEAP grant, which is the Homeless Emergency Aid Program. And then there's the KESH grant, which is California Emergency Solutions and Housing Program grant. Again, because the funding for this position is completely outside of the city's control, it could be pulled or repurposed without our say-so. We are recommending that this position be declared unclassified. I want to clarify, there is another position of homeless programs coordinator currently in the department, which I believe that's funded through general fund, or at least mostly through general fund. That would not be affected by this action should the commission approve this action. But on this one, again, because we're not certain of the funding, that we're recommending a declaration of unclassified. And again, the position, it's a salaried position. It's the same pay, same benefits, same status overall. It's just it would fall outside the city's civil service, traditional civil service protections. And should there be a need to eliminate the position by way of layoff, we would not have to make an effort to lay this person off for any type of cause. So with that, happy to answer any questions. Again, Mr. Bulanikian is here as well.
Appreciate it once again, recognizing that, at least from my perspective, we'll move a little slower. Certainly we're not going to operate at the speed of light on this one, but nor are we going to lag behind. I did want, for the benefit of both myself as chair and fellow commissioners, to make reference to the charter provision on unclassified positions. To me, this is a serious issue because, of course, the individual that you will gain as an employee, a city employee, will not have the benefits of the civil service, the protections of the Civil Service Act. And so Section 7 of the Charter makes reference to there are a very specific number of individuals, positions within the city that can be deemed unclassified. For instance, the city manager, the city tax collector, special officers of the police and fire department. I'm not sure what that means. And further, positions in any unskilled labor class created by a special or temporary purpose, which don't exist for a period longer than 30 days. And I believe it allows that the commission may, upon application of the appointing agency, and that would be your officer, and after public notice and hearing by an affirmative vote of 4/5, so we really need everybody everybody up here to affirm what you're trying to do. Exempt any position in any unskilled labor class or any part-time, seasonal, or temporary position for such period of time as it may determine. So in a sense, in order to satisfy our obligations under the charter, we have to have a certain number of findings. Findings mean that we find that the particular position fits within the charter exemptions for unclassified. So that's why I'm moving a little slower. I think we'll probably move. I can't speak for the rest of my commissioners. I see there's great value. I suppose the question that will be asked, and I'm anticipating questions from my fellow commissioners, is why did you move in the unclass? Is that really because of the reliability of the funding stream, because you're looking at Prop H funds and federal funds for homeless assistance, and there's no, again, reliability or no positive assurance from any of those funding sources that the position today, if we were to hire today, will be in existence or funded in 2020, FY 2020?
Chair McCarley, members of the commission, you're right. We have two full-time positions, a community services manager. She's paid by general funds 50% of her salary, and 50% of her salary is grant funded. And we have one homeless programs coordinator, which is funded 100% through HUD grants. HUD gives us around $2.5 million a year in homeless programs, homeless services. We have Measure H that have been allocated since 17-18, and now the new CASH that we applied for in the amount of 723, and HEAP that we had applied for from the state. Both HEAP and CASH are from the state. So it's about a little over 1.2 million in funding. With that money comes some money for admin costs. That admin is around 175,000. So we want to use that money to hire this unclassified position. We are hoping that with the new governor and the policies that he's putting in place with affordable housing and homeless prevention and homeless solutions, we would apply for additional grants and hopefully continue employing this unclassified position. But moving forward, this position will be funded for about a little less than 2 years.
I see. And so if I were to ask, or we were to ask the city attorney to craft the findings, it would basically be that we're looking at a temporary position. Again, there's no, at this particular point in time, expectation that this will go permanent, meaning it's funded from the general fund.
As of now, no.
Yeah, I thank you for that commentary.
Just as a background, when Mr. Hoffman was here, we had almost 25 employees that worked in a housing department that worked here for maybe 16, 17 years, and they were unclassified. And way back then, we had a catch-all where we brought every single one of them in as classified due to just being just the injustice. But on this particular item, I see this as being, if there was ever an exception, the one exception, where I wouldn't have any problems voting for this position to be unclassified due to the fact that we don't know what's going to happen next year with the same position. So that was my comment. If there are no other comments, I would, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Mr. Devine, Commissioner Devine, sir.
You're going to have an open exam for this, or how are you going to fill this position?
We'll have an open exam, open recruitment. We had 3 hourly exams the last year and a half, and we hired 2, and they left onto another city. Better pay with benefits. We had another hourly employee that left a nonprofit with better pay and benefits. So I think opening a homeless programs coordinator, unclassified, with nice monthly salary with benefits, I think we'd get a lot more applicants.
And appropriate assurances that the job could indeed be temporary. So if I were to do my addition, you have 2 positions that are unclassified now that support 3?
No, the 2 full-time.
2.
The 2 full-time FTs that we have, they're civil service.
They're civil service.
Yes, they're
so
civil
this
service.
would be the only unclassed position that you are asking us to approve tonight.
Yes.
I'll finish my question. The second question I had was, in the past, or have you had any problem in recruiting for unclassified positions? Do you get a pretty good candidate pool, or do you find that candidates really want to have the protection of civil service before they apply?
This is my first unclassified recruitment, but I'll refer that question to Mr. Doyle.
Come back in 6 months and let us know.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Devine, I could probably answer that question. Again, the few positions that we've done this, we haven't seen any significant, lack of interest on account of it being unclassified. If you really think about it, there are so few organizations, even public sector, that have civil service protections in the fashion that we do. Really, it isn't that big of a factor. I think more of our candidates these days, they're interested in the salary, the benefits, and the other sort of lifestyle things that go along with each job. But I will assure you, on the bulletin and any advertisements we do for this job, we will declare that it is unclassified, just so people know ahead of time not to have an expectation. But again, historically, it hasn't really been a problem.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Ms. Kazarian?
My question is the Classified Homeless Program Coordinator position. Is that position currently held by someone who also assists the Community Services and Parks Department coordinator?
Yes. Chair McCarley, Chair Kazarian, yes, we have one homeless programs coordinator, and that employee assists the community service manager in administering homeless programs.
And now your proposal is to have another one which is unclassified to do exactly the same thing, so I take it that there's a need for additional
Staffing, yes.
I see.
To monitor these 3 grants, the Measure H program, the CASH program, and the HEAP program.
Okay, and my follow-up question to that is, assuming the funding dries up a year or 2 later, if the need remains, do you have any plans to propose to City Council for allocation of any budget as to an additional person?
If we need the staffing, we would turn in a service level increase, or we would secure additional funds through the state, LA County, or the federal government.
So your hand's going to be out, so to speak. Commissioner?
One other question. How does this person interface with Essentia? I understand Essentia does the same type, I think they do the same type of homeless services. So is there an interface, and if so, how does that work?
Could you explain Essentia?
Oh, I'm sorry. Essentia is the homeless facility that we have here that provides housing and
Yes.
services for the homeless.
Chair McCarley, members of the commission, Essentia is our lead nonprofit agency for the coordinated entry system in the Glendale area. So they handle all of our homeless services. So what we do is when HUD funds the Glendale Continuum of Care, we distribute the funds to the nonprofit agencies in Glendale, the largest nonprofit being Essentia. We do give some funding to Door of Hope, Family Promise, Catholic Charities for Homeless Prevention. So this position will be working closely with Essentia, Armenian Relief Society. They'll be working on RFPs, RFP the funds through Measure H, HEAP, and CASH. So we're hoping that the nonprofits in the area apply for funds, and we distribute those funds, and basically they'll be monitoring how these nonprofits use.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Thank you, Chair.
I'm entertaining a motion.
Move to approve.
Second.
Call the question.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate the oversight. It's very, very valuable. It's interesting as we develop responses to a critical problem in our community.
Commissioner Karian?
Yes.
Commissioner Kazarian?
Yes.
Commissioner Devine?
Yes.
Chair McCarley?
Yes. And we move on to number 11, and I'm trying to frame how this is going to be presented. I assume that there'll be, to use my favorite expression, a back brief from the registrar concerning his coordination.
Mr. Chair, could we have it read in the...
Yes, could you please? Yes, I'm jumping the gun here.
Employee concern regarding interpretation of minimum qualification and rule interpretation.
And so I'll begin again. This is in a response to questions that were raised earlier about a particular, I believe it was a classification, and these were submitted to the HR department. And our HR director, our registrar, took considerable amount of time to communicate, to discuss the issues with the employee, and came forth with a report that is now found on page 23, 37, excuse me, of our agenda materials.
Yes, I can give a brief overview.
Yeah, a summary of, the reason I raised this is that we are not in any way going to proceed with a hearing. I don't think that this is an action which would require any vote on the part of the members of this board. I could be mistaken. I'm looking, Ms. City Attorney, is this item actionable on our part? Or is this
It's listed for
informational?
discussion and
Thank you.
appropriate action. There could be direction to follow up.
Okay, but nothing in terms of the specific employee or employees who are referenced in the document. All right, I just wanted to frame that so that upon hearing your report, we'll solicit commentary from our members and see where this goes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Last month, an employee of our Integrated Waste Management Division within our Public Works Department addressed the Commission on a variety of issues that he has experienced in the course of his work with the city. And again, the Commission encouraged him to try to address those matters within not only his department, but within the Human Resources Department as well. And again, further direction was that if any issues falling directly under the purview of the Commission be appropriately brought to the Commission. Following that meeting, this individual, and I guess I neglected to put his name, but Mr. Saavedra, and he addressed the Commission earlier this afternoon. Following that meeting, he requested a meeting with me, and we met, I believe it was February 1st, along with a member of my staff, and he had a representative with him from the GCA. And he raised some concerns surrounding an exam that he had recently participated in. That's the Senior Integrated Waste Truck Operator. And we spoke about those. Actually, we spoke on a variety of subjects, not limited to these, but you know, my effort was to try to focus him, if he wanted to go to commission on any of these items, to focus on those that fall within the commission's authority. And the items that he raised with me involve really two aspects of a particular exam that involved this candidate, and one involved the interpretation of the minimum qualification for that particular exam. The second involved an interpretation of a particular rule, which again, I discussed this with Mr. Saavedra. We disagreed with the interpretations, and you know, and again, it was his desire that the matter be brought before the Commission. And again, each of those items I can go into some detail with them. They're quite simple, I think, but I can do that, or if you want to ask questions, whatever your
I'm going to look to my fellow commissioners whether or not they want a detailed explanation from Mr. Doyle, or whether the written summary that you provided, and I assume provided to Mr. Saavedra as well, he would have access as public information anyway, would suffice subject to questions.
I'd like to make the record clear as to my position as to this item.
You have every right, Commissioner Gazarian.
Is this an appropriate time to do that?
It is, because this is one in which I've asked our registrar to come forth with the results of his communication, in conversation with Mr. Saavedra. I think that there are issues regarding interpretation of such terms as minimum standards. And Mr. Saavedra, Mr. Griggs, they brought forth some very interesting issues that I'm sure will explore during the balance of this year. But please, Commissioner Gazarian, put on the record. Yeah.
Before we start that, I'm wondering, out of, I guess, fairness, since we've heard the staff's report on this and read it, if we shouldn't give the appellant a chance to present his position before we make any comments or decisions.
I'm going to ask for...
If I may, Mr. Chair, my comment is as to the presentation by the chief examiner that has been given to us. Certainly, during my comment, I'm also going to, it was my intention to seek clarification from the individual in question. But first, I want to make the record clear as to my understanding.
Then we have to, then what I say as the chair, and I acknowledge that, Commissioner, no, it's just a matter of framing this. So that's why I began this conversation by saying this is not a hearing. We asked that the registrar, our chief examiner, Mr. Doyle, come forth and address the concerns of our employee, our city employee. And he did so, and he wrote a report. And I asked, is this actionable? And I assume if there are issues that we can identify in his written report, perhaps, quote, a misinterpretation of the term minimum qualification, we could address it, we could have conversation, we could discuss it as a potential for amendment of the rules and regulations, once again, of this commission. I'm just not so sure that we should open this up for a hearing. And I also, and this is something, and I referenced something that you said, Mr. Gazarian, Commissioner Gazarian, last month, and I think you addressed the right of appeal, and I believe it's important. This is a right that's afforded all. That's very interesting. It's Rule 3, Section 7. It's an appeal of a disqualification. So I assume when an employee finds himself or herself in a situation in which they are deemed disqualified because of the absence of minimum standards, there is a process, and I believe that Section 7 would allow somebody, quote, and this is, I'm almost borrowing from your phrase, I didn't read it, but I'm pretty close, may submit to the commission a written appeal requesting a review of the disqualification.
Chair McCarthy, if I may, and I'm sorry to interrupt, this is not a hearing, and I just caution
That's
all
exactly
of us
the point.
to be careful to use the appropriate language. He is not an appellant. This is not a hearing.
There's no
grievance that's been filed.
That is exactly the point.
There was an employee who came forward during oral comment, made some comments. There was some direction on the part of the commission to the chief examiner to do some additional review. He has done that. He's provided a report. As far as I know, there's no card that's been submitted for oral comment. So while you can ask Mr. Saavedra if he has comments, he has not expressed an interest to comment. And in fact, we asked him if he was here to speak on this item, and he said no. So I just want us to be careful on how we move forward with this, because a hearing and an appeal require different rules under our process, and he has rights for a hearing, so let's just be careful how we move forward on that.
Let me respond by saying that if you caught what I was discussing, I was concurring with Mr. Gazarian that there is within our rules a procedure. As I equally indicated, I do not believe, and once again, this is why I tried to frame the issue at the beginning, that this is not a hearing. We had excellent work done by our registrar examiner in response to his communication with Mrs. Vedra, who in fact commended the chief examiner for his interest, attention, and communication, and perhaps not resolution to the absolute satisfaction of the employee, but at least he had an open mind to listen. So from what I see, this is just an opportunity to get a report, and that report we have read. And I wanted to make reference, and this is, since this is a singular point, why I embrace something that Commissioner Gazarian had said before, is the appeal of disqualification. We do have a process. This has nothing to do with tonight. But the process exists for an employee who feels that something went wrong in the promotion activity to indeed come to this commission on an appeal basis. The rules are pretty clear. Tonight is not the night to do that. It is not on the calendar. It would be inappropriate to hear it. But this is a significant issue for Mr. Saavedra and others. And so I again thank the examiner for all the work that he has done. It appears that Commissioner Abkarian has something.
Go ahead, Mr. Kazan.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Because this is an open, televised session, I wanted for the public to understand what it is we're talking about, and to understand that when I read the action section that says this item is presented for discussion and appropriate action, I don't think there's any action that needs to be taken, and the reasons why I, Commissioner Kazarian, do not believe that there's any action that needs to be taken. Right. And the reasons are twofold. Mr. Doyle has provided us, per request, a memorandum which details his meeting with a City of Glendale employee who appeared before us previously and again last month. And there appears to be two issues that were discussed that were presented for us for discussion here. The first one is the minimum qualification interpretation, and as to that, it appears very clear to me that the job bulletin, the relevant job bulletin at that time required 2 years of experience driving a truck and current possession of a Class B commercial driver's license. Now, I can understand and respect an employee of the city disagreeing with what the minimum requirements were, and perhaps they should be otherwise, but frankly, I cannot wrap my arms around the employee disagreeing with the interpretation. And what am I talking about? The employee is suggesting, and that is a good suggestion, that staff in the future may consider more specific language regarding the truck driving minimum requirement. That's well taken by this commissioner. That suggestion is very well taken. But the language, and for those of us who engage in interpreting language, and some language is much easier to interpret than others, this one is quite easy. It says 2 years of experience driving a truck and a current possession of a Class B license. It does not call for a 2-year Class B license. Perhaps it should, but it didn't at that time. And because it did not, I don't see that the person who may have been hired was improperly hired, given the fact that I believe that person in question that was hired, that is the call of the question of the dissatisfied city employee, indicates that that person only had a Class B license for 8 months. Well, he could have had a Class B license for 1 day. He would have qualified based on that description, 2 years of experience driving the truck and a current Class B license. As to the second issue, the rule interpretation, I note that it was during busy holiday season, and the employee does not believe that it was fair to give other candidates additional time to obtain the H-6 form when he, the employee, and others properly submitted the form prior to the close of the filing period. In response to that concern, an articulation of unfairness perhaps, the response from the chief examiner appears to be the following. The language places no condition on extensions, and if any candidate for any promotional position requested the additional time, per the rule, staff would have no ground to deny the request. And with that, I don't see any inappropriate matter that causes me, this particular commissioner, to seek action from my fellow commissioners. Thank you.
Commissioner Abkarian.
Mr. Chair, okay, let me just, my understanding of where we are. When I saw the report, I didn't understand why we have a report in the first place, to be very honest with you. My understanding was that we had someone who came and voiced some concerns. And we said, you need to discuss the concern up the chain And if then you're not satisfied at that point, there's an appeal process where you can actually do an appeal and come in front of the Civil Service Commission. That's what my understanding was. I don't know why we have the report, but not that I don't appreciate it. I appreciate it and it's much appreciated, but I don't want to be in a position where now, as of next month, we're going to have a row of people going down the hallway asking us to not review everything, and they believe that they're going to get an advantage by coming in here telling us something, and because they put it on the TV and because we're sitting here, now the chief examiner is obligated to review their material, the city manager or the assistant city manager or anyone else. So let me make sure what my understanding was from the last meeting, and I chaired the last meeting, so I think I understood it. My understanding was that we had asked that the employee go through the process, normal processes of the city, and which we have nothing to do with. And at that point, if at the end of that they believe that their vested rights in their job, and I said that specific word, is being jeopardized, then to appeal that decision and request the appeal to be heard by the commission or commission hand-picked individuals. At that point, we were told, well, that appeal cannot be ever done in the city. And I said, well, go through the process and see what happens, make the appeal request, and then we will at that point make a decision if an appeal is appropriate or not appropriate. So as far as I'm concerned, I have nothing to say whatsoever about a regular process that a human resources, the city manager's office goes through to resolve these issues, and we will not, in my opinion, have any influence in reference to individuals' rights or having the right or not having the right. At the end of the process, if they believe their vested interest in their job is being discriminated against, they have problems, or the process has been a problem, then a specific request for an appeal hearing where both sides will then be heard, and then we'll make a decision at that point. I will not make any comments in reference to the report. As much as it's appreciated, Mr. Doyle, I believe that you have a job to do, and that we have no control over what you're going to be doing with some of these employees.
And Mr. Chair, if I could say that, perhaps I misinterpreted what occurred last month, but it did appear as if there was somewhat of an open invitation to bring matters forward. Mr. Saavedra did that. Mr. Saavedra specifically requested of me an audience with the commission. I'd like this to be brought before the commission.
Good.
Okay. I listened to probably a half a dozen things that he had concerns with. I said, that doesn't fall fall under the commission's authority. This doesn't, this doesn't, this does. I'll extend you that courtesy. So I think part of this report at the very end, I indicate that, on a related note, staff recommends that the commission provide direction on matters such as these where employees wish to address specific topics or concerns that fall under the commission's purview. And I think in this circumstance, as well as the issue Mr. Griggs brought up before and Mr. Alvarez, I think I would need some direction on what to do in these circumstances, because people are always going to want to come. And I think there's a feeling of empowerment currently where people feel, well, commission wants to hear from us, so let's do that. But it will affect certainly my workload, your workload, and I would like some direction on how you would like these handled going forward. Whether that's a response, of a concern, and that perhaps I do a report, send that to the commission offline, as opposed to agendizing.
Let me finish this thought, because
when you're done, when everybody's done at the end, I'll ask to be very briefly heard as to a specific issue.
I want to just make one more comment again. I want this to be clear. An employee talking in front of us does not give them a higher advantage than them coming to you and talking to the city manager's office or the assistant city manager's office. This is just a forum that I can't prevent someone from coming and talking. That doesn't mean that at that point we are going to then say, Mr. Doyle, pay more attention to this than everything else that you have in your office. I personally say there is a process that the employee must go through in the city to look at their grievances. That process is not going to change. I don't believe that this body has ever said that we're changing that process. If that process, they go through that process, they finish that process, and they get to the end, and they believe that there's an issue, that discrimination process or unfairness based on a vested interest they have in that job, then that issue could be appealed, and there's an appeal process they have to go through. That's my understanding. We're not going to come in here and have an employee, a line of employees here talking about an individual issue, and then have Mr. Doyle give us reports on each individual issue that comes in front of us. I mean, that just is not something that the Civil Service Commission can do and should be doing.
And I agree. If I could also make a very important point, I think the chair alluded to this earlier. There are processes for appealing an exam, and those are defined in the rules, and particularly Rule 4. And we make clear what those processes are at each step of the testing process. Where and I think when we were going through the rule amendments, we talked about the 3-day, the appeal period. There's a timeliness issue, and if an employee participates in a written exam and feels that questions or an exam is inappropriate, or in an interview panel, and they believe that inappropriate questions are asked or some element of bias exists, they have an absolute right to appeal that right then and there and bring that forward to my office, and my staff deals with that. That's a process that's well defined, and it's something I've worked with for nearly 30 years. I need assistance, or I need direction on the broader concerns that are raised. And again, I apologize if I've misinterpreted anything the commission said, but when I met with Mr. Saavedra, we spent at least a half hour or more together on these particular issues. We agreed to disagree, and his concluding statement was, I'd like this to be addressed with the commission. Okay,
Yes.
What do I do at that point?
I think, Mr. Registrar, that we, with your request, and from what I've heard from my fellow commissioners, if I could digest, first, we should again commend you for working with this employee and providing that employee with the opportunity to talk to one of the most senior members of our management staff at Glendale. And for that, we cannot thank you enough. I concur that there are processes and procedures within the charter and the rules of which we reviewed over the last year, that provide a process, an appellate process of sorts, for those employees who feel that in some way or another they were denied an opportunity, what my fellow commissioner calls a vested right, whether in employment or perhaps, if you can deem a vested right, a promotional opportunity, depends on interpretation. But there are rules, both in Section 3, in Rule 3 and Rule 4, which are pretty explicit. The next point is, you have asked for guidance. And my suggestion to my fellow commissioners is that to the extent that we have the ability to conduct something akin to a study session, in which, and I suppose we could do this in open forum such as this, in which we have a conversation led by our distinguished city attorney and members of your staff, in which the rights of the employees are identified. This is over the air. so that those who listen to us, review the transcript of this proceeding, will get a better understanding of what the Civil Service Commission does, what authorities we have, and what an employee who feels that in one way or another he or she lost an opportunity, what are the processes, again, the processes that are available to them to correct what they deem was something that was done wrong by them. And finally, with that said, from a parliamentary standpoint, I'm suggesting I would entertain a motion to close the discussion on this, because I'm not so sure we're going to be able...
Gazarian had
Oh, that's right. I'm sorry. I should defer to Mr. Gazarian. Then I'll come up with my motion to close the conversation, subject to, if my members... Oh, we've got two. Subject, of course, and I'll allow this final comment, to perhaps have this study session, because we've been asking for this now for the last 3 months. Mr. Gazarian, you're going to defer to Mr. Devine. You wanted the last word.
No,
all right.
this doesn't have to be the last word. What I have to say is very brief.
Yes.
It is, in conclusion section, Mr. Doyle, you have placed the following sentence. Mr. Saavedra requested that he be allowed to address the commission on the matters above. What's troubling to me is if at any given time, an employee feels their rights were violated, and they brought about a matter, as others have done in the past, we have had here, depending on the matter, either an open session discussion or a closed item at the end of our meetings. So I'm not even aware whether or not Mr. Saavedra, I don't recall any specifics from last month's meeting where Mr. Saavedra was saying, I personally was denied this opportunity because of X, Y, and Z. I don't recall that. If that was or is the case, there is a process for it, which is clearly set forth in the rules.
And let me be really clear. He was not denied any element of this process. He participated at every step and actually did quite well. So this didn't involve him at all. It involved essentially his concern about the inclusion of other candidates and things that were afforded to other candidates.
So when I read that it says there's a request that he address the commission, and that is why I was telling my fellow Commissioner Devine that, earlier when I was speaking, that at the end I'm going to yield to this request and ask you, what is that about? I'm happy to hear from Mr. Saavedra. Mr. Saavedra was here last month. I was happy to hear from him last month. But what am I hearing from him about? Because that is why I prefaced my position as to the two matters which I find it to be beyond dispute, beyond rational basis for me to disagree with. The explanations provided were more than satisfactory to this commissioner. So what is there to discuss?
And that's an excellent question. With that, wasn't the last word, but I think we're looking at Commissioner Devine for the last word, and then I'm going to solicit a motion to close discussion on this.
Okay, I think Mr. Doyle a minute ago asked the key question, at least in my mind. After the gentleman went through the process, he met with Mr. Doyle, and Mr. Doyle was under the impression, and I think we may have led him in that direction. If not I led him in that direction to, bring a report back, and so we could take a look at it. Short of that, and I'm hearing from my fellow commissioners that there really should be a hearing process, and we should follow a process if he's not satisfied. But the question that Mr. Doyle asked was, what do I do next? Meaning, what does Mr. Doyle do next? He had the meeting. The gentleman disagreed with some of the things that came out of that meeting. And Mr. Doyle, as I say, asked the key question, what do I do next? So I'm going to ask Mr. Doyle, what are your options? Short of coming back to the commission, what are your options as far as what to do next? And more important, what are the gentleman's options?
Yes.
What are the gentleman's options at that point? You meet with him, you give him your explanation, you're not on the same page. What does he do next?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Devine, I think that's a good question, and I'm not sure I can can answer that, but if someone has, sought to address, issues of concern and, has contacted various city officials, myself or the city manager's office or assistant city manager, and continues to get the same answer. And again, if it's an issue that falls under the purview of the commission, I would imagine that if they wanted to come to the commission and address that issue, they could.
In what fashion? In what way?
Oral, well, I'm seeking some direction, but, it could be oral communications, it could be anything, but.
It can't be oral communications. This is what I don't understand.
Okay, so I think the chair is going to assert, wait a minute, the chair is going to assert its position here. This is one of those in which we're operating in an area that we have insufficient knowledge to respond. So my suggestion is that we defer to next month or 2 months to allow the resident experts, both the city attorney and our registrar examiner, to come forth and provide a more detailed answer. Frankly, I'm quite satisfied with the rules that we have reviewed and revised, which provide for an appellate process which is pretty clear as to the date, time, and when and how you appeal a disqualification under numerous grounds to this commission. It's pretty clear to me. But those questions that are raised by Commissioner Devine are appropriate questions. I assume that many members of our employees, staff, would be interested in the results of that. So I am suggesting that we put it over. This is one study where we have an open and robust conversation about the very things that we've been discussing without any structure. Ms. City Attorney.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, I don't know that putting it over is going to bring you additional information that is contained in the rules themselves. So if an employee disagrees in the manner in which an exam was conducted, the rules currently provide recourse. If the employee does not take advantage of that recourse, then his rights to continue with addressing it before the commission have concluded. If he does then pursue his rights and then disagrees with the conclusion of the Human Resources Director, disagrees either with his conclusion or disagrees with the course of action, at that point he can bring this back to the Civil Service Commission and express his opinion. The commission can hear it, but at that point the commission doesn't have the ability to change the director's ruling. You can ask for a report, which the commission, which Mr. Doyle has prepared. He could either present it to you in this open forum, or he can address it to you like the city manager does to the city council, present it to you in some other fashion. The commission can then look at it and decide if it wishes to discuss it in a public forum, and then you may. If the employee takes exception with the rule, then perhaps through its representative association can try to address the amendment of the rule and bring it forward to the commission in that way. But at the end of the day, when a matter has been investigated and completely reviewed by the HR director, and it does not fall within the purview, so to speak, of the Civil Service Commission, then it ends there. But if it does fall within the purview of the Civil Service Commission, then at that point the person could appeal it to the commission, and then the commission could hear it in that way. And this is the discussion that we talked about investigations all along.
Once again, with that, and I think that provides clarity, at least for me. It's sort of consistent with what we've been discussing from this chair. But I turn to my fellow commissioners, because the option is, while there's reticence, push the matter over to another month. There might indeed be questions of substance. Certainly the chief examiner has raised those, Mr. Kazarian, certainly Mr. And I look to them as to whether there is any benefit, you see any benefit to having for lack of a better term, a study session which incorporates those comments, which I think are absolutely accurate, but that's my personal opinion, not necessarily the opinion of my commissioners. Is there any benefit?
I would request, because I think that this embodies what we discussed earlier, which is what investigative powers do we have and what can we do as, I know there was a report that was given to us, but it appears that there's still confusion for me. So if there's confusion for one commissioner, it's got to be confusion for others. I want that same report to be brought back, and we have a discussion on that date as to what are the investigative powers of the commission. Maybe then our esteemed attorney could give us 5 examples as to what does that investigative power noted in the charter mean. And maybe based on those examples, then I can understand what our powers are. Because at this point, besides an appeal from a firing of an employee, I don't know what other investigative powers we have.
Well,
but it says investigative powers in the charter, so there's got to be some powers we have that we can do something.
With that, would you join with me on, I'd like to make a motion to table and then
Discuss this next time.
ask for a study session or report. That is our right as commissioners to respond to a detailed request from two of my distinguished commissioners on my right and my left, and come back and provide that sort of response to the questions that have been raised by both Commissioner Gazarian and Commissioner Abkarian. I think that is appropriate not only for us in our education, but as well for every single employee who works for this city. So I made the motion. I don't have.
So I don't know that you need a motion. I can
move the table.
Yes.
And we could ask. I
will join the chair in the request for a session as to those issues, and add to that the request from Mr. Doyle, the recommendation of us to provide direction.
Mm-hmm.
I'm ready to provide direction, but I'll defer it to another session. I'm ready to provide direction now.
The question is, when we talk about a study session, is it any different than our next regularly scheduled meeting?
No, it's no different, except that we are prepared. We will have an opportunity to discuss this in an
We
open
just have a line
forum.
item.
Yeah, we'll have an opportunity to discuss in a robust conversation next meeting. That's the only reason I call it a study session. So with that, I don't know if we need a vote, but it sure does memorialize action.
We don't need a vote.
So the
The
direction
direction's
from the
clear.
chair is that we will conduct a study session with respect to the very significant issues that were raised by each one of the commissioners here, and we'll solicit detailed responses from both the city attorney's office and from the examiner. That'll be next week, next month.
Line item to be added to the next
line
meeting.
item to be added. Thank you. All right, with that took a good amount of time, and we move to reports. Now, this should be simple, since we cleaned up the whole issue of employee evaluations.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, the primary report is the late performance evaluation. As you can see, the new format is alive and well, and looks like we've seen a big reduction in those departments that have late performance evaluations. We only have 3 departments in that category. The rest are looking very good. 11 first notices and 0 second and third notices. So it's a note and file. If you have any questions, be happy to try and answer them.
They said it can't be done.
Yeah, one comment. You know, every once in a while, what we do has value. So I'd look to each one of the commissioners who framed this issue and moved forward with an improvement of the reporting, and we got benefits from it. Congratulations to the commission. All right, I guess we're at last but not least, not quite adjournment. This is for what we used to call good of the order, Civil Service Commission and staff comments.
Congratulations.
Hearing from Chief Examiner and Registrar. Any further comments?
Just a follow-up item relative to the rule amendments, which the commission voted upon last week. Following that meeting, I made contact with each of the employee associations because there were a couple of the proposed amendments that were different than what had been proposed in our meet and confer sessions. And I gave them two weeks to respond if they had any concerns proceeding forward with the commission's direction, and I've not gotten any concerns raised. So we're now ready to bring this to City Council, and I need to find a Tuesday night to bring that forward once they stop talking about right to lease. So, and I'm not staying here till midnight.
Oh, no. I would recommend, just, and I look to the fellow commissioners, it might be appropriate to be present with you, not all of us, one or two of us.
We have a chief examiner.
Yeah, we
He can
do.
make a
I mean, that's.
presentation, I think would be.
I can handle it, I assure you.
Thank you. We wanted always to stand by your side, Mr. Rich.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, okay.
I do have one comment.
Yes.
Could we call the chief examiner instead of a registrar?
Well, yes, he's both terms.
Confuses me every time I look at somebody else.
No, we can, that's fine. We'll
If
call
there's a-
him the appropriate title that he feels comfortable with.
If there's a safety retirement involved, you can call me anything.
All right, any commentary? We should say from the junior to the senior, but we haven't made that classification. So looking with no comments present, then I will, I moved. Is there a second, or is this too?
Second.
All right, call for the question.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.